still have you out by 11 o'clock. Well, welcome to our webinar, Volunteer Florida Volunteer Management Basics. And this is part one. I'm going to go back real quickly just to make sure I share a little bit about Volunteer Florida with you all. I know many of you all are familiar with us already, but we're the governor's lead agency for volunteerism and national service. And we also are the lead agency for volunteers and donations before, during, and after disasters. And we really focus on national service, fostering volunteerism, and that work during emergency management situations. And we really want to ultimately see Floridians who are engaged in their communities, because we know that that is transformational for our state. So just wanted to tell you real quickly how we can support you. We have a number of different really fantastic funding opportunities, including AmeriCorps, and also the Volunteer Generation Fund, which is actually open now. If you go to volunteerflorida.org and you click on grants in the top right corner, this is a wonderful opportunity for you all to receive dollars, and you have a match, but it can be in kind, to help you grow your core of skills-based volunteers. And skills-based, when it comes to this particular funding opportunity, is really any skill that you need a volunteer to have. So it's not pro bono. It doesn't mean you have to have lawyers or doctors or anything like that. Anybody that you use as a volunteer that needs to have a specific skill set, this kind of funding could be ideal for your organization, and that those dollars can be used for personnel, they can be used for technology, software, and so on. So I hope you'll take a look at that, and you can also sign up for our Volunteer Florida updates as well. If you go to our website. And then, of course, what we're most excited about right now is the Volunteer Connect Volunteer Opportunities platform. And we are launching this to the public all over the state in the fall. We will have advertising, all kinds of marketing, and that's something that we will do ongoing, is making sure the public knows that this is a go-to place to find volunteer opportunities. So I hope you've all registered, and if you haven't, we would love for you to register. We've got a number of different webinars. If you click under organizations, when you go to the site, there's lots of trainings, and we'll have those ongoing, as well as recordings and quick start guides so that you can maximize the use of Volunteer Connect. There are a number of different really great ways that the platform can benefit your organization and thus benefit the public. So there's promotion, scheduling, tracking, communicating, and of course participating in training. So we're really thrilled about this. This is going to be a real cornerstone initiative of Volunteer Florida, and we would love for you to be a part of it. So this morning we're going to talk about a number of things, and I do want to let you know we're going to be focusing most on sort of the recruitment, before recruitment parts of the agenda, because I know that's typically where the most interest is, as people are interested in trainings and so on. So we really want to make sure we provide you all with lots of information that is hopefully really helpful for you all as you continue. So sorry, everybody. I have a wonderful assistant with me. Her name is Lizzie Winchester, and she's the training coordinator for our national service programs, and she's also assisting me with technology. Hold on. Okay, great. All right, so let's get going. The reason that volunteers are important. Oftentimes we sort of go, duh, of course they're important. This is something that everybody knows. We also know, because of the difficulty in recruitment, because of how we have to promote in an ongoing way, even internally, how critical volunteers are, that people don't always comprehend that. So there's a couple of components people are usually familiar with. This is the usual when people think about the value of volunteers. Volunteerism is associated with a 27% higher odds of employment. So individuals who do volunteer, when they add that to their resume, they're gaining skills. It's something that employers really notice, and it can be really beneficial for them. It is worth $8.2 billion in value to our wonderful state, and that is as of 2017 for that year. So we know that there's a tangible economic value to volunteers. And we know that there are physical and mental health benefits of volunteers. And just so you know, I'll be providing you all with the sources for all of the information in the PowerPoint. I'm going to provide that in a separate document along with the slides, all of that. You guys will be getting that within the next few business days. So if you want to know the details of any of this information, I'll certainly be providing that to you soon. Now, let's go into some of the other kind of realities about the value of volunteerism. So I want you all, as we're talking and I'm sharing this information, to really think about how you message volunteerism. I want you to think about how you message it to senior management, how you message it to your fellow staff members, how you message it to your actual volunteers who are your existing volunteers, how you message it to people that you're recruiting and your varying audiences, okay? Because we often think, yes, volunteering makes a difference, it's important, it changes lives, but we want to get more specific than that. What is it that makes volunteerism valuable? We know, again, physical, mental benefits, wonderful, powerful, economic value, excellent, the benefits that it provides to individuals. So I want you to think on this. Volunteerism strengthens social connections. It builds strong, safe, cohesive community. It enhances civic engagement, and civic engagement is volunteerism, it's voting, it's a whole variety of components that really are critical to our social fabric. You know, it's not just our public and our private sectors. Civic engagement among the citizenry is also extremely important and helps deliver public goods and services. So again, we really want to think about all of the layers of volunteerism and its value. You all, it's important to remind yourselves of why it's so critical that you all are doing this impactful work in your communities, but this is also important because you are pitching this, you are convincing, you are encouraging other people and helping them to buy into and understand that creating a culture of volunteerism is so critical to your communities. I thought these were two really interesting phrases. And I was thinking if you were working for example, with an environmental group, how neat it would be to say that volunteers are a crucial renewable resource. But that even for other groups or audiences could be a really neat phrase that people kind of capture and think, oh, wow, that's really neat. As human capital, as social capital, volunteers are a crucial renewable resource for our community, you know. They're not expended. This is over and over again, people are able to do this really powerful work and change their communities. And then it's a mutually beneficial experience, which again, we've kind of pointed to that in the previous slide, but this is helpful for the volunteer as well on a lot of different levels. I really like this quote: doing more than you have to do because you want to in a cause you consider good. And then what your role is as volunteer coordinators and others who are interested in or who enlist volunteers is to define good. That word, when we say you can make a difference, when we say good, you've got to operationalize that in specifics for your organization. So in a cause you consider good, what is that good that you're able to convey to other volunteers? So again, volunteers are so ultimately incredibly valuable. All right, so the value to your organizations. And the reason why we're spending time on this, as I mentioned, is because you want to be able to share the value of volunteerism and then get specific with what it does with your organization. And the language you use is incredibly important. So be thinking about this when you think about your recruitment messages, when you think about your volunteer handbook, when you think about what goes into your annual report, when you think about what you do at a volunteer recognition event. You know, when you talk about how people have served for a certain amount of time, talking specifically about their impact or saying, you know, Mr. Smith, the work that you're doing helps create a safe, strong, cohesive community, and here's how, is a really powerful thing that you can add on to thank you for serving for 10 years. And it's the same thing with recruitment. You can put that type of information or at the top of your volunteer handbook. This is the kind of thing that really helps people to absorb the weight of the work that you would like them to do and the type of program you have. So that's why we're spending this time on this. And I hope that you guys, again, I'll be providing this information, but I hope you use some of this language. All right, so think about it this way. Volunteers enhance your services by supplementing and broadening your existing work. They can become a strong group of supporters. And remember, you can use terms like ambassador, representative, leader when you're talking about volunteers. Hey, you all being part of our volunteer program, you all are real leaders in our community because you are creating that cohesive community we all desire, and you're serving outside of your jobs or outside of the work that you do. You can be very missional with people, and that helps them to feel very ego involved in what you're doing. Those volunteers, they bring community connections, they bring personal networks to your organization. And just everyone, if you'll just make sure that you're on mute, you're welcome to come off mute if you have anything to say. I'm not going to mute all of you just because I do want to make sure that if you have any questions, you are welcome to answer. But if you do get too much commotion, I may have to mute everyone. So just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. All right, and so how else do they bring value to your organization? Keep this language in mind. They offer specialized skills, and be thinking about this too as you're thinking about what your current volunteer job descriptions are and what volunteer descriptions you may be writing in the future. Does this jog your memory or, jog some thoughts for you? Wait a second, here's an area where we do need specialized skills. Here's an area where this, something could be valuable. We should consider this. So helps to increase diversity in your organization, can provide opportunities for people who are differently abled, members of underprivileged populations, people of varying age groups, or other underrepresented populations to take ownership of their communities, which is something that is so important to be able to provide to individuals, to have that sense of ownership. All right. They bring new energy and ideas. Now, this one we always have to be careful with because the reality is that sometimes we don't actually really need new ideas. And so certainly you wouldn't want to push a volunteer opportunity as something where you're wanting to solicit new ideas if that's not necessarily the case. But certainly if you have, which hopefully you do, an open feedback loop with volunteers and with your volunteer coordinator or other staff, you may receive new ideas from them, maybe not necessarily about your programmatic work, your missional work, but maybe how your volunteer program goes. But certainly that energy component can be huge for staff members who may be a little worn out, love what they do, but you have those individuals who come in very excited about what they're doing, and that can really be so helpful for your organization, for your clients, or kind of whoever your end user is. They bring great value because they often end up providing more of their time than they originally planned because they really develop that interest in the work you're doing. And then, of course, as we talked about before, they contribute that economic value in time and service. And philanthropy really is time, and talent and the dollar amounts, when we think about what people give. So let's flip the switch, or flip the coin, and talk a little bit about volunteers why. And this is, again, something to be thinking about when you consider recruitment, throughout the materials you have for your volunteers, the conversations you have with them during management, when you're managing them, when you're supervising, when you are training, when you're orienting, what's the language that you're using to help keep them interested, to keep them engaged, and to continually convey the impact that they have. So, someone asked them, when you look somebody in the eye and say, hey, can you help out this Saturday? It is a very powerful thing. We know that asking, word of mouth, are some of the most powerful ways that we share ideas and that we get people involved. They care deeply about the issues that your organization addresses and or about social change in general. They have personal experience of the effects of your organization's issues and want to do something about it, right? So they have a personal experience. They've either been part of the organization that you've worked with, something like that. For example, maybe a former gang members might not want to be involved in an effort to reduce and prevent youth violence because of the experiences that they've had, would be an example. They're motivated by their view of the world. It might be religion, it could be ethics, politics, philosophy, and they try to improve the quality of life in their communities as a result. They seek the external recognition and internal good feeling that may come with volunteering, and that is a wonderful thing. You want people to feel good about the great work that they're doing. And they feel a need to pay back society for help or opportunities that were extended to them. And a lot of times you see that in mentoring. People realize that they now have the opportunity to serve and impact a child's life, a student's life, in the way that they were impacted. That's often a very direct relationship there, but that's a reality for plenty of different areas where volunteers are enlisted. All right, they have untapped skills that they can use by volunteering with your organization. You know, a lawyer doesn't always want to do legal services. You know, an artist doesn't always want to come in and help paint a mural. They may want to do clerical work. They may have great organizational skills. So sometimes it's not that the obvious skill set that somebody has is what they want to use when they're volunteering. It could be something else. And I do want to mention, you know, when I was talking about people having a real interest in the work that you're doing, sometimes people really love the organization, but kind of some of the key types of volunteering opportunities might not be for them. So, for example, I was working with one of our fantastic grantees, AMI Kids, and they have great programs for at-risk youth. And we were chatting there. Their primary need is for mentors. And we know, you know, realistically, not everybody is designed or has the skill set to be a mentor. And so we talked about the reality that they could recruit people to help with clerical and administrative work, and that would free their staff up to do more recruiting of volunteers. So that's this indirect way of getting more volunteers. It's not something where they are using those people specifically as mentors, but the staff who are resource constrained and time constrained could then, you know, have somebody 5-10 hours in the week doing some of the work that keeps them from going out into the community and recruiting mentors. So you want to kind of think about that creatively. Somebody who says, wow, I love what your organization does. I'm not sure that mentoring is the most ideal part. If you have a few other opportunities available that they may be able to be a part of, they're still identifying with the mission and the importance of it, but they may not be doing that kind of key volunteering work that you have typically asked about. Okay, they enjoy the social situation, they value the contact with other volunteers or participants or staff members. This can be true for people who don't work outside the home or don't have a whole lot of daily social contact. And this can just also be true with people who are an 11 on the 1 to 10 scale of introversion versus extroversion, which is somebody like me. I just love the social connection that volunteering provides. That is often a huge win, a huge benefit for me. And it makes them feel needed and useful. So I want to conclude this section by making sure that we kind of seal these last few slides about language. And this is the core of it. We have got to try to pull people away from the idea that volunteering is nice but unnecessary. And we at Volunteer Florida are going to be working on that so much through Volunteer Connect, through articles, blogs, really wanting to create and change the culture of volunteerism across the state. You know, these are the types of words that we want people to think of when they think of volunteering: critical, key, important, vital, essential. Don't worry, I definitely went to a thesaurus and just looked at synonyms, so I did not come up with these on the top of my head. Powerful, valuable, indispensable, exciting, impactful, compelling, a core component of what we do. So this is how we see volunteerism at Volunteer Florida and how we want Floridians to see it. And we want to make sure that you all are messaging it that way because it's true and because it is so powerful. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get into kind of the next section, which is the strategic planning component. And if you have a look at this, this is what we use here at Volunteer Florida. This is through the Corporation for National and Community Service, and we use this in our Volunteer Generation Fund. But it's, I think, a really helpful life cycle for volunteer management work. And I'm sure you all do all of these things and they all sort of blend together, but I do think it's a great way to kind of look at this information. So if you'll see number 2 is highlighted. That one really is so important, is to do a little bit of planning before you get going on trying to recruit people. And I know so many of you already do this, so I'm preaching to the choir in a lot of ways. And I want you to note in the middle what you see as examples of success. Now, none of those is the number of hours of volunteer work or the number of volunteers. Now, that doesn't mean that that isn't success, that you had 1,000 hours of volunteer work and 100 volunteers. That is fantastic. But the reality is we're looking at the outcomes, not just the output of the work that we do, right? And so the type of service delivery, the number of services available, the intended impact, the improvement in the infrastructure or capacity of your organization, and volunteer experience, retention. These are the types of things that you want to be thinking about, again, when you're sharing with individuals about your volunteer program, when you're trying to recruit volunteers, when you're talking to senior management, when you're talking to donors, and so on. We want to be thinking about measuring success in bigger, more comprehensive, and more impactful ways. So this is kind of what I'm following along today, and in the second part of our volunteer management webinar, which will be in a few weeks. So before you do any additional planning, procedures, recruitment, any of that, 2 things. One is obviously what we talked about, which was really kind of absorbing the reality of the value of volunteerism for your organization and just for our society in general, really making sure that all of that that reality is in the back of your mind as you're planning, as you're participating in all of these other volunteer management functions. And then you really have to be sure that the volunteer work is connected to your vision, your mission, your values, and your principles. And it's, again, that's probably sort of a duh thing for most of you as well. It's out of the outflow of these things that your volunteer program flows, but even at the individual volunteer level, making sure that this information is clear throughout. What it is that you're doing in your sector, in your focus area, specifically in your organization, so making sure that that language is also part of what you use in recruitment, in management, in outreach. So evaluating need, capacity, and support. This is the kind of work that's important but not urgent, right? We want to get to why aren't we recruiting more volunteers, but it is important periodically to make sure you're doing a needs assessment, really looking at and investigating how volunteers can serve your agency and what kinds of skills are needed. And some of this goes back to if you have an active, dynamic, strategic plan. This comes back to being sure that you have volunteer opportunities that align with what your goals and objectives are for your organization. So how can volunteers move your organization toward its goals? You have some that are obvious that you use on a regular basis, but again, think outside the box on that. Is there an indirect way volunteers can, like the example I mentioned, having volunteers doing administrative and clerical work, and that being able to free staff up or other volunteers to help recruit mentors or recruit other types of volunteers you might need? You want to process and think through that. I won't go through all of these right now, but these are some of the kinds of questions you can ask yourself when you're talking about evaluating the need, the capacity your organization has to have the volunteer program, to either grow it or shrink it. What is sustainable for your organization? What kind of support do you have for it in terms of dollars, in terms of encouragement in your organizations or in your community? So your stakeholders, who does approval of any changes to your volunteer management program? Who manages it? I know it's many of you. What kind of buy-in do you need, the resources you need, and so on. Okay, so I want to just kind of think about goals for just a second. And this goes back again to what the volunteer management functions graphic showed about what we think success is and what our outcomes are. And so this is, again, just wanting to be careful. The outputs, which again is the number of volunteer hours, the number of people who volunteered, those are critical, but they're only part of the story. So I just want to share this with you real quickly, again, as you're establishing goals and really thinking about what is actually going to be most impactful in terms of what our volunteer program looks like. So consider for a moment an organization that exists to plant trees. In year one, it has 100 volunteers and plants 1,000 trees. In year two, it retains 50 volunteers, so 50 of the original 100, and they still plant 1,000 trees. If we measure by head count, year two would raise all sorts of red flags since they've seen 50 people not return. Yet the facts point to year two as a great success because fewer resources have been used to achieve the same impact. The return on investment was higher. So we want to think about the number of appropriate and dependable volunteers that we need to adequately support the work that we're doing. And we don't want to overplan, of course. The more volunteers you have, the more work it takes to manage them and so on, because you want to avoid that law of diminishing returns. But I hope you all think about that, again, outside of the box. If you said you have 50 volunteers, but you have the same return, how powerful is that? And so you want to make sure that you're messaging that in a way where people understand that that impact was really significant and it was a great success, even though you had fewer volunteers. So again, just kind of the thoughts to think outside of the box with as you're looking at your goals. So this is the kind of thing that's real boring, but it's super important, which is your policies and procedures, making sure that those are in place. An employee handbook is not the same thing. There should be something that's specific to volunteers. When was the last time it was reviewed? And even if it was reviewed recently, what about how it looks? Is it clip art? Is it Times New Roman? Is it really faded? Think about whether or not, you could spruce it up some, because policies and procedures are not the most exciting thing. So you want to be, thinking about how to make it look appealing, that specific document look appealing. So when was it reviewed last? Who reviews them? And how do you determine when it's necessary to revise it? These are your internal procedures that you want to think about. This is just a list of some of the things that for your internal policies, I think it's important for you to have. And this follows that volunteer management cycle that we just talked about in the graphic, but writing out some points about each of these things. And I will send you some examples of volunteer handbooks. I know most of you, if not all of you, have one, but it's great to look at what's going on in the field. It can help you think about, what you might want to add or delete or modify in whatever your existing policies and procedures are. And so note at the bottom, you want to be specific and be clear. It's easy to cut and paste and kind of close our eyes and say, okay, that basically means what we think it means, but making sure that anyone who is a layperson is able to clearly understand their expectations and the other components of the work that you do. This is also true with other staff members. Anybody, if you were to leave your position because you won the lottery, would somebody be able to understand what you've put into place? And so to be clear, be specific is for whether it's an internal or an external audience, but some of this information may be specifically for your internal purposes only. And you want to keep a record of policies and procedures, their revision dates, and who revised them. Really important. And if you haven't done that in the past, I don't think you need to spend a lot of time on that, but towards, looking into the future, that could be one of your procedures. This is that you make sure you record when a handbook or any procedure was revised and by whom. Okay, so again, won't go through all of these, but these are some of the core sections that you may want to have when it comes to policies and procedures, and you want to have that in writing. A couple of those core ones are your waivers and your releases, conflict of interest, firearms discrimination. Some of those really core legal components are going to be extremely important. And then you also want to look at your employee handbook to see what expectations you have of your employees and how those translate to your volunteers. So I won't go through all of those. Okay, so the next thing, you've done some planning. You've looked at what kind of core legal components you need to have in terms of your policies and procedures framework. And so you next want to be crafting those job descriptions, so to speak, for your volunteers. And you want to be sure that they align, again, with those goals and so on. So the purpose of the position, and this is where you connect to the agency's mission, to the impact of the work. You can point to previous impacts that other volunteers have had here. And this is not necessarily what you're going to push out in recruitment, but you want to have a clear understanding internally of what you would like, your qualifications for it, the training required, things like that. This is something great to have on a shared drive, so that all staff members are aware, not just those who work with volunteers, of what is available. Or maybe you do sort of an abbreviated version for all staff to kind of know how volunteers are serving in your organization. You really want to avoid that kind of bifurcation where you've got staff who sort of say, yeah, we've got volunteers, that's great, I don't really know what they do or how they do it. Being able to have a staff that has a working knowledge of the volunteer program, its impact, and then the type of work that volunteers do is really a best practice. You want to be careful of organization lingo. As much as this is internal, again, you want to be very clear about it. And then this is a position description that you do typically have in either your handbook or that you have someone sign. So you want to make sure that it's very clear, that the language is exacting and concise, and you want to make sure you use those values, missions, and your mission statement and the benefits of volunteering as you share. Okay, so I have an example, and this is for a job description or for recruitment, but I want you all to think about how these two differ. Okay, so again, with audiences and so on, I just want to get your brains kind of going on this. So the first one is, volunteers may help in the office with clerical duties such as computer data, entry filing, packet preparation, photocopying, and more. Volunteers may also be trained to answer phones and help at the front counter. Okay, great. Very clear. We were talking about being concise. Next one, no experience necessary. We will train you. Staff members love working with volunteers. This work contributes to the efficiency and effectiveness of our office. It's critical that our information remain organized and accessible, and your help makes that possible. This is a great assignment for someone who needs office training, needs to keep up their office skills while not working, or to practice office skills. If just one or a few of these tasks is particularly appealing, let us know. Okay, so we're talking about the same job, the same volunteer position, but phrased in different ways. So you do want to think about that with your audiences. You don't want to go, you don't need to craft a new message for every single group. But again, when you're thinking about how to promote something, be sure, obviously, you've got to be honest about it, but then, think creatively about what might be appealing, right? So this one is longer. This one may not be very appealing to somebody who is older, professional, more established. They don't need office skills, and they may not need a clear understanding of why clerical or administrative work necessarily connects to the impact of the organization. The impact part, though, is always important to have. They may prefer something like this. It's very clear and concise, but this is just a thought. So one is not better than the other so much as just thinking about what would be most appealing for people. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind as we go into recruiting volunteers. Okay. I know this goes without saying, but my goodness. So this is a funny, endearing, darling error page, right? So basically, at the end it says brilliant, and then our web butler can fix the mistake in a doodle, which I think means quickly. I thought this was really funny. The point is that the page is down, though, so it doesn't matter how darling the page is that tells someone there's an error or that says it's under construction. The reality is that that page is down. A lot of people like to presume that it's only millennials who may be irritated by this, but anybody, if you're looking for information and it's supposed to be in a particular place and it's not, that's frustrating. So look at what's accurate and inaccurate in all of these areas and more. Your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email, mailing addresses, phone numbers, obviously your website. The other thing is that accuracy also, you want to include timeliness in it. So if you have a Facebook page and you're like, everything on it is accurate and your last post is from 2017, that does not indicate something terribly beneficial to the person who's looking at it. So you also want to consider that. Certainly you can have archives of things on your website, even if it's fairly the same, it's essentially the same message, or you upload a picture to your website or to your Facebook, it should be current, something, or get rid of it? Is it something that's really beneficial to you to have that Facebook when you only update it every 6 months? So be thinking about that. But before you start recruiting, when people call, when people email you, when people look at your Facebook page, what do those things say? And is it all messaged the same way? Okay, this one I know is obvious to everybody. Sorry, let's go back to this. But the environment that your volunteers work in is extremely critical. Now, there are times when, especially we see this during disasters, an organization may not be set up in the most ideal circumstances. Well, people are typically very motivated and they're willing to kind of deal with whatever the circumstances, and that's totally fine. But overall, take a look at this, right? I was in a scenario, we'll not get any more specific than that, and I sat down in a chair and it was broken. It was there for me to use, but it was broken, and I ate it. I completely fell over. It was so embarrassing. I was not hurt. It was just my pride. But little things like that can really throw off people, as you can imagine. So we've got to love that Apple 2GS over in the left corner. I loved working on that when I was in third grade. What's the laptop that you're giving a volunteer? And it doesn't mean, some people are really willing to work in less than ideal circumstances. This is kind of extreme. So I don't, we certainly have our resource constrained and so aren't able to provide, everything that our employees have. But just think about the environment that you're providing to people before you start recruiting. All right, so remember these different bits of language that we talked about earlier. As you're recruiting, this is when you really add the detail and you flesh it out for your work. You flesh it out for the work that you want your volunteers to do, right? So why is it a mutually beneficial relationship? That's what you're going to write up, and you want to put that on Facebook, or you want to put that on, you want to share that when you're interviewing somebody. You want to share that when you're tabling and recruiting at fairs and so on. That quote, as I mentioned before, you could have that quote at the top of a flyer and then, put a listing of what good is for your organization or something like that. So remember this information, the other value kind of propositions about volunteerism that we talked about before. So, of course, all of this is information that you want to be thinking about. A lot of this is in the job description, but remember, recruitment is different. You may not be providing the job description to people. You may be providing a condensed version. You want to think about which of the types of, details about the volunteer description are most important for people to know about. So, for example, on Volunteer Connect, we cover a number of these, but we don't cover all of them. So, we don't have a field for attire, but that's something that in the description, is that going to be something that's really important based on the type of work that you're asking volunteers to do? If so, then maybe that's something you want to include. A lot of times people forget about special accommodations, but, is the opportunity going to be appealing or accommodating for somebody who's differently abled? Should people bring their own tools, their own water, their own food? I can get going during the day and kind of forget, like, oh my gosh, I need to eat lunch and it's 2:00 in the afternoon or something like that, and I can run out and go get it. You want to make sure that volunteers know when their breaks are, when their lunches are. If they can just kind of run out at any time, if there's a specific time for them to do it, you want to be able to remind them of those things. But is there, what do they need to bring realistically? How this helps our community. Remember that one is something that would be really powerful to include. So these are just some thoughts there. And I know court-ordered service, a lot of people don't typically think of that, but that's actually going to be a checkbox on Volunteer Connect, because we know that a lot of people are either re-entering society after being incarcerated, or they, just have some other issue and are in need of community service. And so if that's something that you're comfortable with, we want those individuals who are looking for opportunities to know that, whether something is appropriate for groups, families, and so on. So just some things for you to think about, certainly not necessarily to include all of it. Depends on how much space you have and so on, but you do want to be thinking about some of those things. Okay, so more on recruitment. How many volunteers do you hope to recruit? This is really core because we typically do the free-for-all, as many as we can get, right? And then here's what happens. You have an event, and you're painting a house, and you have 20 paintbrushes, and you have, maybe you have lots of buckets, but you don't have enough paintbrushes for everybody, and you don't have enough responsibilities for all of those people. You get somebody or a group of people who are there, they're getting lots done. They don't necessarily want to share and say, okay, I'll take a break and let somebody else help. And then you've got a set of people who have been there for 2 hours not really doing anything. And maybe they brought some waters out to people and so on. So really think about how many people are necessary to get the job done. And then you can have a waiting list. And a waiting list is different from having everybody expect that they're going to be able to do all of that work. Get your team together. Your staff can be a fantastic resource for you. They can be ambassadors not just for your agency or your organization, but also for the great work that your volunteers do. So you want to make sure that you share with your staff members about what volunteer work you'd like done. You want to make sure you ask people. You want to start with existing volunteers, students, clients. You want to consider your spheres of influence, your friends, family, neighbors, community members. I realized the other day, Volunteer Florida, we're not actively looking for volunteers right now, but I just realized the other day how few of my friends know a lot of details about the work that I do. We don't always talk about work, but, when I do share things, it's usually some of the great projects that are impacting our community that I share. So, be thinking about how you can represent and share about the volunteer programs that you have. You want to think about service learning, universities. Don't forget your technical colleges and your state colleges. You can write articles and blog posts for local papers, for newsletters, and you can certainly connect to local businesses. They can adopt your agency, so to speak. They can provide pro bono work. A lot of businesses have employee engagement programs. So approaching them with a proposition that their employees do a certain amount of volunteer hours for you, and kind of in exchange for you elevating the message of their organization and so on, could be a really great idea. You want to talk to existing service organizations, professional and community organizations, and don't forget the language you use. Make sure that if you think about the Chamber of Commerce, and I use Access Tallahassee, that's the kind of like under 35 group of the chamber, but if you're talking the Chamber of Commerce, you may have, you may talk about maybe the economic impact of volunteers and some of those other components, the higher odds of employment and so on. You may want to focus on some of those things more so than you would with maybe another audience. Partnering with local businesses, as I mentioned before. So I do want to talk a little quickly about just the quality of the kind of recruitment that you do. So Canva, CANVA.com, and I'll send you guys the link. You can put together really beautiful Facebook profile pictures and wallpaper. You can create all kinds of really great looking graphics, and it's free. So the two right there that I have are just quotes, but they look really sharp. They're very clear. That's the kind of thing you can include in a handbook. You can put on a website. You can put on Facebook. Like I said, maybe your Facebook isn't super up to date. Just put a really great quote about society or about volunteerism, and at least you've updated that way. So this is a really great site for you to use, and I'll share some more with you. So see, that's not Facebook. I think it's a wallpaper, banner kind of a thing. So you want to make sure that you sign up with digital platforms, again, with social media. Facebook ads are not very expensive. I strongly encourage you all to have a look at those because they can be really effective. And they share with you what the kind of efficiency and effectiveness and return on investment is when you investigate those. So I strongly encourage you in that. And then, of course, Volunteer Connect in terms of signing up. So those are a variety of the ways that, we think that recruitment can be done successfully. And when you think about, okay, well, we've already tried with our college, and we've already tried with local businesses, and we've already tried, this is the reality of marketing. It's the same thing with hiring. It's the same thing with businesses marketing products, is that you have to get out there, and it's a kind of a long-suffering, perseverant kind of work that you do. So if if you worked with somebody last year at the college and it didn't work out, maybe you work with someone different at the college this year. Maybe you go to a different college within the university. Maybe you change your language. Maybe you think through new volunteer opportunities that might be more appealing to students. Maybe you come up with virtual volunteer opportunities so that students can work in their pajamas at home for 2 hours and don't have to come into your office. So push the envelope on some of these recruitment methods and ways that you can connect to people to be sure that you are really kind of exhausting those opportunities, and think about that strategically. We're going to have in the fall a webinar that is all recruitment, 1 hour of specifics and more details about recruitment. So we're really excited about that. It'll be in September. And so, this again is about the volunteer management life cycle as a whole, so we can't spend a ton of time on everything. So I'm excited about that, and we'll make sure to let you all know about the date that we select for that. We may go just over 11 o'clock because of the technical difficulties, but we are almost done. So with screening, you want to keep your policies and procedures in mind as you go through them. You can do screening by phone calls, the application, of course, interviews. A lot of times organizations get overwhelmed with having people come in for interviews. Start with a phone interview. There may be very telling red flags that come up in a 15-minute conversation, and you haven't invited that person to your office to do a formal interview yet. So phone interviews are great, or conversations, of course, reference checks, things like that. These are different methods. It's up to you what is best for your organization. But again, think about that phone before, that physical interview. Again, keep in mind a number of volunteer opportunities. So when you see an interest that maybe veers off of what the person signed up for, certainly offering other ways that they can serve can be really helpful. And maybe they say, oh, okay, actually that one is better, or that timeline is better. Flexibility and giving them options is really helpful when you're interviewing. So the main difference between a volunteer interview and a job interview is that the applicant is not being evaluated on how well he or she can do a certain job, but rather how well the potential volunteer fits into the program, and whether or not the volunteer has the motivation and ability to make the program better. So that's I think that's a really impactful quote to be thinking about. Of course, you want to be looking at whether they can do the job well or not, but it is not an employee. And so there are going to be some things you learn as you go with the volunteer, but keeping an eye out for how you feel like this person might fit in with the work that you're doing, and whether they are motivated and are able to make your organization better. Okay, so all of these, I think, are things that you guys are probably familiar with. What do they enjoy? What are their skills and abilities? There are people who, love, maybe they love working with kids, or they love, whatever the particular opportunity is, but they really only work well in small settings. So the idea of like a large group setting and having to kind of manage or usher people would be super overwhelming for them. So that's why the enjoyment may not always match perfectly with the skills and abilities, and so maybe you have to kind of think through what might be a better option for them. Again, connecting opportunities and skills, another task they might be better with. And then, having community awareness. Honestly, if there's somebody and it really just isn't a good fit, if you have a partner that you think might be able to use this volunteer well or mobilize this volunteer, make that suggestion. I mean, I think it shows your commitment to your community as a whole when you're willing to do that. So, it doesn't sound like we have anything that might be best for you, but ABC organization does this type of volunteer work, and we think that might be great for you. So keep that in mind. So training, this is the last big section, and as I mentioned before, do you have any more paintbrushes, you all? I was giving that example before, but with training, you want to go into those vision, mission, principle, outputs, and outcomes. Telling stories is huge with this. That language about the value of volunteerism, the language about the impact that your organization has on the community. So not just what the volunteers' impact is, but your ABC organization as a whole. Here is how we help strengthen the social fabric of Tallahassee, Florida. You really want to be compelling in that way, because trainings are hard. Training and orientations can be kind of a drag. So keeping it interesting, obviously icebreakers and helping people to foster community is great, but it also at its core should be explaining why what you do is just so wonderful, okay? So those detailed descriptions of volunteer roles. I think it's really helpful to have a member of senior management who does your welcome, who shakes hands, who asks questions of the volunteers so that they are connected to your organization. At least one other staff member, even if it's not senior management or an executive director, who come in and say, we really are so appreciative. And this can be throughout their experience as volunteers. They should see other staff members besides those who just work with volunteers. You want to make sure you go through the key how-tos, even basics like where the bathroom is, where the water fountain is, where the kitchen is. Is the kitchen, are all things in the kitchen for volunteers to use? If a volunteer goes in and starts using the coffee maker and gets eyes from the staff who think that only the staff should be able to use the Keurig, then that's an experience problem that you don't want volunteers to have. So, thinking about those things and making sure that you share them. What are the resources necessary? Can they wander into the supply closet and grab some Post-its if they need it? Do they need to talk to somebody else if they need something like that? Are there certain tools or areas of the building that you don't want them to go into? Things like that. Really preparing people for this work so that they feel encouraged and empowered to do it. So again, just wanted to reiterate the funding opportunities we have, Volunteer Connect. If any of you all ever have any questions about training, about resources, or you want to kind of workshop things that are going on in your organizations that you are having problems with related to volunteerism, please let me know. I would love to chat with you, especially in the next month or two. We think Volunteer Connect is going to get pretty busy. We're hoping for that we get lots of traffic, but certainly if you want to set up a call to talk about anything involving your organization's volunteer program and building capacity for that, please let me know. I would love to do that. So thank you all so much. We hope that you will register for Volunteer Connect. Our next webinar is actually next week. We're going to have one about Volunteer Connect. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll have part 2 of this volunteer management series. I will have this recorded and up online, and I'll be sure to email you all and let you know when it's available. And I'll also be sure to email you all of the citations and references from this presentation. So thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I hope it was beneficial for you. Feel free to email me if you have any additional thoughts or anything like that. And I will be sending a survey just to get some feedback from you all. So thank you for your time, and I hope you all have a wonderful